How's it going, guys? Welcome back to a new installment of Kernels of Truth. This is episode 19. I just thought I would hop in and basically give my commentary on what I just saw recently. Before I begin this installment, please be a pal and click that like button on your way in. So, today, I'm going to be discussing a case that took place a year ago, and the person in question has been given a guilty verdict. And I believe the verdict was like several lifetimes put together. This individual, I believe, received over 2,000 years in jail. That's crazy to imagine, but that's what took place. So, this individual, he just couldn't make it work in the US. He lived here for, I would say, roughly since the time he committed the crime back in 2025. He lived about 3 years, give or take. So he lived from 2022 to 2025. So we're just gonna round it up to 3 years. Anyways, it got intense because this happened last year around the summer. And this individual in question decided to show up when the protesters were rallying it up together. But I wouldn't say it was anything out of the ordinary. We're not talking about Minnesota. We're just talking about a peaceful protest of at least, give or take, 30 people. Well, this guy in question decided to basically throw his life away in a very meaningless manner. He and his wife came from Kuwait back in 2022, and he started a life in the US illegally. He didn't have, I don't know if he had a visa, but from what I read, he entered illegally into the country. So he had lived here for 3 years before ultimately committing a crime that resulted in the death of an 80-year-old woman by the name of Karen Diamond. But in the midst of all that mayhem, there were other people who were also injured and traumatized beyond belief. But most notably, it was Karen Diamond, because she was essentially, well, she didn't pass away right away, but she did burn alive. And it took at least 3 weeks, I believe, from the incident to when she ultimately passed away because of her injuries. And this, of course, was traumatizing for her sons, who basically were alongside their mother, and they couldn't describe the pain their mother went through at the age of 80. For 3 weeks straight, she was fighting for her life, and the pain was indescribable. So ultimately, after 3 weeks, she lost her life. And this individual, apparently, he says he never had a history of committing crimes. And the reason he did it was because basically, if you want to cut it short, he felt entitled to it. He felt that these people, I don't know if he confused them for Jews. Now, that's the part that I always wonder. Did he confuse them for Jews, or was he upset that they were supporting Israel? That's the bigger question, but you can't always enter someone's mind and expect an answer out of them. But either way, he either thought they were Jews or he thought that they were supportive of Israel and the captives at the time, that there were captives and they from Israel, and I guess they wanted them to be saved. So that's why they held that uh, movement back then. And he ended up becoming outraged. He lost all common sense, and he ended up committing a crime that injured dozens of people. And apparently, according to, if I remember correctly, this is alleged, right? Judge Nancy Salamore apparently stated, from what I can remember and from what I read, that he had been planning this crime for at least a year. Now, granted, he planned this probably around 2024, and then he committed the crime last year. But this is a man who moved from Kuwait back in 2022, and he and his wife migrated to the US, and they both share 5 kids. He was working multiple low-wage jobs to make ends meet, and they were living in a two-bedroom apartment in Colorado. And it just baffles me that he has his family, his kids, and he just throws it all away, which makes everything harder for the wife and the kids to commit a senseless crime. And most of the time, when some of these individuals, especially when they let religion get, what is it? When religion marinates too much in their heads, they justify their actions even though the means only hurts other people in the process. Whether they do it intentionally or not, you can't always tell what's the intention. There's a motive, but you can't ever say for certain if you know someone did it with intention or not. Now, this guy obviously did it with intention because if we go based on the report, he had been planning this for at least a year. Even though when he threw the, and I struggle saying this word so much, the Molotov cocktails, he apparently just threw two out of 2 dozen. So he probably had at least over 20 of them. But he only ended up throwing two. And then that's when multiple people got injured. And even a dog also got injured as well because he was charged with animal cruelty. So it just goes from bad to worse. And once he starts throwing the Molotov cocktails, he proceeds to say free Palestine. But this is the problem when someone can't assimilate to a country. It doesn't matter if I assimilate somewhere different from the US or if someone different from the US assimilates to the US. You have to respect the culture, and you need to understand that no matter where you decide to go, there is a bottom line of what you can and can't do. And if you bring yourself self entitlement into it, you're just going to get yourself in trouble in the long run. But that clearly went over his head, and he just didn't think of the consequences. As a result, he ended up receiving a sentence of over 2,000 years behind bars. So that's a lot of lifetimes right there in one go. It's unfortunate and it's tragic that it happened to these people who apparently once the sentencing took place, many reported that Many of the victims reported they were unable to live normal lives again. They even stated that they're afraid of going to places because of the emotional impact that one isolated event had on them. Unfortunately, this just happens very commonly, and it always happens typically when there is a protest going on. Now, of course, I'm not here to tell you what religion you should follow, any of that nature, because that's individual to the person. It becomes a problem when innocent people suffer as a result of a misunderstanding or a situation that they don't fully know about, or anything else that escapes my mind. But typically not everyone is thinking from your train of thought. So, and then he, of course, through the interpreter, of course, after he commits the crime and after he's been found guilty, it was last Thursday, I believe. So we're talking on the 7th, I believe, give or take. Yeah, it was around it was on the 7th of this month. That's when he was charged, over 2,000 years behind bars. And all of this could have just been prevented if he put his former life aside. Meaning, if he just focused on his wife and his kids, he wouldn't end up hurting other people who went to that demonstration. This was in Colorado a year ago. If this man, Mohammed Salori Solomon, who entered the country illegally, from what I've read back in 2022, if he just lived his life peacefully and focused on his wife and kids, he wouldn't be ending up behind bars for over 2,000 years. But the problem is, this is a big issue, and it creates a lot of divide, because when you say something, people will interpret it differently. There always needs to be safety precautions, regardless who enters the country or not. It isn't about just strictly discrimination or where they come from. It's to avoid a situation that can go from bad to worse in an instant. And other people, regardless where they come from, the people who live in the US shouldn't have to deal with the stress of people from outside countries who can't migrate into the US. Because how is it their responsibility to deal with people that are unable to live amongst other people in the US? They don't know where they come from. They don't know their backstory. They don't know their religion. They don't know their history. And so that just creates further divide, that just creates further misunderstanding, and that just escalates issues to a point where violence gets out of control. And this is why this man is facing over 2,000 years behind bars. He said he had no history of committing crimes, but the fact that he was able to plan this crime at least a year in advance, and he did it without thinking twice about his actions, shows me that he was not able to fully migrate into the US. And it's simply put because if he did, then going to one of these rallies or protests, whatever you want to call it, that would be the furthest thing from his mind. He would just be focusing on working, doing whatever he needs to do for his wife and kids, and call it a day. But unfortunately, his beliefs and what he thought he should do for people or against people who support uh, Israel, that clouded his judgment. And he ended up taking an innocent life in the process while hurting at least 13 other individuals who were a part of that peaceful demonstration. And it wasn't really, it wasn't as clear cut as a Israel versus Palestine issue. They were more worried about the people who were being held captive. It wasn't about who is right and who is wrong between Israel and Palestine. They were more worried about the people who were abducted. But this guy thought differently. This guy thought, okay, these people who are protesting are strictly pro Israel. And he may have thought these people might be Jews, and I don't know what else was going through his mind, but he wasn't thinking logically. And the protesters ended up paying the price for a man who literally put a bullseye on them and calculated this crime for at least a year. And we're just sitting here always trying to argue about who should be in and out of this country. That it's not as easy as you may think. Anyone deserves to be in the country. It's whether you can migrate into the country, it's whether you can actually be beneficial to the country. But when you have these type of conversations, it quickly spirals out of control. It goes into a completely different uncharted territory. And then you end up having to defend yourself for just simply stating the obvious. So it happens a lot. And people are entitled to their feelings, people are entitled to their thoughts. But sometimes you just got to call a thing and stop worrying about what other people feel, because you just have the same right as anyone else to put your 2 cents out there, especially if it's a well constructed opinion. Now, you're not always going to have all the facts. We don't always have all the facts. Sometimes we have to end up eating crow because we're wrong. And that happens, it's inevitable. But these conversations, they don't happen because a lot of the time people misunderstand each other, or people just want to stoke the flames and one up each other. And that's why we are in this situation where there's so much divide. What really surprised me is I never realized, but maybe it's not as black and white as I thought. But apparently, uh, and I might be completely out of line. Basically, an attack based on political views apparently isn't considered a hate crime. Now, I don't know if this is 100% true, whether the source was accurate or inaccurate, but that is what I read. And if that is true, I believe we might have to go into uncharted territory and make it into a hate crime. Where if you attack someone for, I don't know for what specific reason, right? I'm not very good with this, with giving an example here. But if you attack someone for being a Democrat or a Republican or an independent, whatever floats your boat, or even someone who I don't know, who doesn't vote, whichever way, right? Someone who's like, I don't even know if there's a term for it, apolitical. I don't know if there's an exact term. Someone who's just not interested in politics. Basically, I believe that we have reached a point where we might have to start treating these situations as a hate crime, even though it might not. make as much sense as, let's say, religion or skin color. We might have to include politics, where if someone attacks someone because of their political views, I think that at this point it should count as a hate crime, even though it sounds stupid just to even point that out. Like, why would you even consider that a hate crime? But the reason is because a lot of the people are at each other's throats because of politics. So at this point, if people can't keep their hands together, sorry, if people can't keep their hands to themselves, then at this point you might as well consider any attack due to political influence or indifference a hate crime. And that will teach people to keep their hands to themselves, because we've reached this point where it just seems that nothing's clicking up there and people just want to attack each other because they don't think the same in terms of their politics don't align all the time. And I'm not going to sit here and say these conversations can't get upsetting or even triggering. It is, but I'm also realizing that political political conversations in general aren't going to be easy. And I think anyone has the right to vote or express their views, but I think it's in terms of having an open dialogue or conversation about it, I feel that only a select few should have the ability to have these conversations separately, because not everyone has the ability to have a conversation without triggering the other person, or without saying something insensitive, or worst case scenario, attacking the person for thinking differently. So we've reached that point where maybe it should be considered a hate crime. You know, if you attack someone because their politics aren't aligned with yours and you just think that just gives me an excuse to be belligerent and act out, if that's how people perceive that situation, then there should be consequences attached to it. And that means that anything that they do that results in someone being injured, be charged for that crime, but also be charged with a hate crime on top of it. And then these people, or anyone in general who acts in this manner, will think twice about attacking someone over their politics. But that's essentially what I think. Uh, this is an example that basically Mohammed Salary, his middle name so weird. Mohammed Salary Solomon. He is an example that even when you are living your life and you come out from a different country into the US, you have an apartment with, with 5 kids and your wife. He's an example of why people need to be vet and processed correctly, because he plotted a crime. And the reason he really ultimately confessed was because the evidence was stacked against him. You know, through an interpreter, he expressed remorse for his actions. But we all know that the reason he expressed remorse, and even the what is it? Even the district attorney, I believe, Michael Doherty, pointed it out that basically he just confessed that he was upset over the passing of Karen Diamond and anyone else he heard in the process, because that wasn't something that he should have done, and that apparently he just acted out of line. And of course, he requested the death penalty, but I mean, it's just it's just sickening, because he was stern about the fact that he just defended his views, and that was it. He was stern about it. Your views shouldn't give you a hall pass to injure others just because they might be pro-Israel, because these people are thinking in a very short-sighted manner, and it's very sickening the more you think about it. You throw your life away, your kids, your wife, everyone else is wondering what the hell is happening here. And the reason is because he planned this attack for at least a year in advance. Costed the life of a woman, Karen Diamond, who was at least 80 years old, and he traumatized over a dozen people who are afraid of leaving their surroundings, or I guess going to different places more often because of a senseless attack. And when you add it all up, it's nonsensical. Even if you had issues or your beliefs don't align with Israel, you just basically found an outlet, and you treated these people as your outlet where you could uh, just throw your all that aggression out and just hurl it at people. And people were in the crossfire of your anger and your hatred that has been building up inside in the name of religion. And of course, he said that once the sentencing was still, reaching its verdict, he said um, that he hopes that people don't misinterpret his actions of what the Quran stands for. And that's too little too late, because people are going to have their opinions regardless of you trying to piggyback and take two steps back after everything has been said and done. You can't weasel your way out of a situation and then say my behavior doesn't reflect that of the Quran when the deed has been done, and people are going to think differently because of your actions. But unfortunately, some people don't care. They just care about making a statement, even if it means hurting others in the process. And a statement doesn't have to be said verbally. A statement can be made through actions that can cause a reaction. And he clearly did it at the expense of innocent protesters who did nothing to him, who never criticized his religion or what he was doing throughout his life. They were just caught in the crossfire of his insanity. And they've been traumatized, probably for the rest of their lives, because of this egomaniac who thought he was well within his rights to attack people just because they were protesting for the freedom of the Israeli captives. That was basically it. And he completely misunderstood the situation as a whole. As a result, an 80-year-old woman lost her life, and dozen other people were injured in the process. And that's basically where we are with this story. It's a very it's a very sad situation in general. Um, Even though he is from a different country, I still feel upset that their kids have to go through this situation, that his wife has to go through this situation. But that's basically the consequences of basically migrating to a different country and not being able to adjust yourself. You got to put whatever you believe and practice it somewhere quietly and separate from the country you live in, because you have to sort of play ball at that point. If you move to a different country, you need to understand that the culture's different, the people are different, and whatever you used to practice in your former country doesn't apply in the country you live in now. But that's easier said than done, because some people would rather defend their nonsense or would rather argue against reality than actually face the facts when they're presented. But other than that, I'm gonna exit this live, and I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend or weekday. I'll see you guys next time.